What if refusing money made you richer? That sounds backwoods. Most businesses exist to sell more, reach more people, say yes to more customers. But some of the most successful companies on earth got there by doing the exact opposite. They said no, constantly, deliberately, and at real financial cost. This isn't a story about caution. It's a story about a resource almost nobody talks about, the discipline to refuse. Start with something almost every shopper has noticed without ever really thinking about it. A typical Walmart or Target carries somewhere between 80,000 and 140,000 individual products. Costco carries roughly 4,000. That's not a failure to compete. It's a deliberate choice. Every additional product a store carries adds real cost behind the scenes. Tracking inventory, negotiating separately with suppliers, managing shelf space for items that barely sell. Costco's own co-founder explained the logic simply. Walk down a typical supermarket aisle and you might find 350 different versions of the same basic item. Different sizes, different brands, all competing for the same shelf space. Costco instead picks the single best option in a category and sells an enormous volume of just that one item. Fewer choices for the customer, far less complexity for the company, and significantly more negotiating power with suppliers, since Costco can guarantee massive order volumes on a tiny number of products. Refusing to stock 99% of what a typical store carries turned out to be the exact thing that made Costco one of the most profitable retailers on the planet. Now take a company that refused something even more valuable, its own past success. In 1997, Apple was 90 days from running out of cash. Steve Jobs had just returned to a company that was, by most accounts, a mess. Over 350 different products, a dozen slightly different versions of the same computer. Printers, scanners, digital cameras, a licensing program that let other companies build Apple clones. Jobs sat through weeks of product review meetings, according to accounts from people in the room. At one point, he reportedly stood up, grabbed a marker, and drew a simple grid on a whiteboard. 2 columns, 2 rows. Desktop and portable on one axis, consumer and professional on the other. 4 boxes, 4 products? Everything else, over 70 products and services in total, got shut down. Jobs later summarized the entire philosophy in a single line that's since become famous in business circles. People think focus means saying yes to the thing you've decided to focus on. It doesn't. It means saying no to 100 other good ideas. Apple lost over $1 billion that first fiscal year. The following year, it turned a profit of over $300 million. That radical narrowing, cutting the product line by roughly 70%, is widely credited as the decision that saved the company and set the stage for everything that came after it, the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone. Apple didn't grow by building more. It grew by refusing to build almost everything else. Now consider an industry built almost entirely around refusal, luxury fashion. Hermès makes a bag called the Birkin. Depending on materials and size, prices start around $10,000 and climb into the hundreds of thousands. Here's what makes it strange. You cannot simply walk into a store and buy one, even with the money in hand. Hermès limits most clients to 2 of its most coveted bags per year. There's no official waiting list, no online order form. Access depends heavily on your relationship with a specific sales associate, and often on a documented history of purchasing other Hermès products first. Each bag takes a single artisan somewhere between 18 and 24 hours to make by hand, entirely by design. Hermès has deliberately refused to scale up production to meet demand, even as that demand has grown for decades. Economists have a name for this: artificial scarcity. But inside Hermès, it functions less like a marketing trick and more like brand self-preservation. If Hermès said yes to every customer willing to pay, the bag would simply become a commodity. The refusal itself, the years-long waits, the unpredictable access is the actual product being sold. Arguably even more than the leather and stitching underneath it. Refusal, in this case, doesn't just protect a company's brand. It becomes the entire brand. Then there's a very different kind of refusal. Geographic and operational rather than financial. INNUT Burger, the beloved West Coast burger chain, has had countless opportunities to expand nationally or globally, the way McDonald's or Burger King did decades ago. It has refused consistently for over 70 years. The company will not franchise, not to anyone, at any price. It remains entirely family-owned, run by the Snyder family since 1948. Its beef is never frozen, delivered fresh from company-owned distribution centers. That single commitment creates a hard physical limit. Every new restaurant has to sit within roughly a day's drive of one of those facilities. That's why even today, In-N-Out operates in only a handful of Western states, while competitors with a fraction of its brand loyalty operate in all 50. In-N-Out's vice president of planning has said it plainly. New restaurant locations are limited by the distance the company can travel from its patty-making facilities. Full stop. The company could almost certainly grow faster by franchising, or by allowing frozen beef, or by simplifying its notoriously minimal menu. It has refused all three for over 7 decades, even as it quietly became one of the most profitable restaurant chains per location in the entire country. Refusing to compromise on freshness cost, In-N-Out national scale. It's also the exact reason people drive hours out of their way just to eat there. Perhaps the strangest form of refusal in modern business is the most literal one: companies that fire their own customers. In 2018, Amazon began deactivating the accounts of shoppers it identified as habitually returning too many items, effectively banning them from the platform for life. Other major retailers followed quickly. ASOS, Sephora, Harrods. More recently, REI announced restrictions targeting a tiny fraction of members, under 0.02%, who were nonetheless returning an astonishing 79% of everything they purchased. On the surface, this looks like a company punishing its own customers. Underneath, it's the same underlying math every business on this list has quietly followed. A customer who costs more to serve than they'll ever generate in profit isn't actually a customer worth keeping. Processing a single return involves real shipping costs, restocking labor, and often outright loss on damaged or unsellable merchandise. One retail analyst summed it up bluntly, discussing Amazon's policy. If a customer is not profitable, and never will be, because of a specific pattern of behavior, is it really unreasonable for a retailer to simply let that customer go? These companies aren't refusing revenue. They're refusing the specific kind of revenue that actually costs them money to accept. Which brings us to the resource sitting underneath every single example in this video. Engineering time, factory capacity, executive attention, capital that can only be spent once. The rarest resource inside any company was never actually money. It's focus. And here's the twist that makes this more relevant today than at almost any point in business history. Artificial intelligence is making it dramatically easier and cheaper to build more products, more features, more variations, faster than ever before in the history of commerce. Ironically, that makes the discipline to say no more valuable than it's ever been, not less. When building something new becomes nearly frictionless, the genuine competitive advantage stops being the ability to build. Almost anyone can build almost anything now. The advantage shifts entirely to the discipline to refuse, to decide deliberately and repeatedly what not to build, who not to serve, and which good ideas to leave on the table in service of a few great ones. The companies that survive the coming decade likely won't be the ones capable of building everything technology now makes possible. They'll be the ones disciplined enough to keep building almost nothing, except the small handful of things that genuinely matter. We tend to admire companies for what they create, their products, their technology, their innovation, but history quietly tells a different story. The great ones were never defined only by what they chose to build. They were defined just as much by everything they deliberately refused to become. Because in business, every lasting company is really built on thousands of small decisions. And the most important one, again and again, may simply be the discipline to say no.